he was a record signing bonus at the time. I mean, it was New York Yankees, so they were going to sign him no matter what. And Scott Boras, though not officially his agent, more of his advisor, they did an excellent job holding the Yankees almost hostage to the last moment that they could to get the top price out of the Yankees. And he did really well his first season in the minor leagues, then went home when the Yankees wanted him to stay behind and do instructional ball. But kind of like what he said, he thought he didn't need to go do instructional ball, and he went home. And when he went home, his whole life changed. Circumstances that are still murky to this day. He had a horrible shoulder separation injury explosion, is what it was called at the time, a shoulder explosion that could really be one of 20 different things. Many of them are rather terrible to think about. Some of the things that could have happened. Was it a bar fight? Was it over drugs? Was there a family? I mean, there are so many different versions of the story. I know Brian Taylor's kept the exact truth kind of hidden for a long time, but I do know that in the coming little bit here, he's going to talk about it. So we may know the exact truth for sure, but I think I have a pretty pinned down in the book about what may have happened.
That was Patrick Montgomery, author of Baseball's Great Expectations. Hello, and welcome to episode 103 of the Irish Baseball Podcast. Patrick Montgomery will be my guest on the show today. This interview is another one that was available to dues-paying members of the Irish American Baseball Society before airing as part of the podcast. The video of our conversation was on the Irish American Baseball Society's Community Network website. Patrick Montgomery wrote the book, Baseball's Great Expectations, which talks about those players who came into pro baseball with a lot of hype, but fell far short of seeing a plaque go up in Cooperstown. Let's get right to it. Thanks for being here, Patrick.
Thank you for having me. It's a thrill to be here.
So I want to talk about this book so much. I was so interested when I first saw it because you came at a baseball book with a really unique topic. And this is the players who didn't make it, the players who didn't become stars. This is a really interesting premise. So why don't you talk about that for just a little bit?
Well, I'm a baseball romantic. I believe in baseball more than anything. I love baseball, but I also know that baseball can break your heart. And these are the kinds of players growing up that I just followed and I loved, and I knew that they were going to be the best players of their generation, and it just didn't work out. And I always wanted to know what happened, why it happened, and basically like the other side of the story. We hear things, but we don't really know them, and I'm just here to fill in the blanks with their stories.
So was there anything that you found in common a lot with a number of these situations? I think a lot of times we could look at log jams at the major league level that maybe it's hard for them to make it significantly on a big league roster. Sometimes guys get unlucky with injuries. I mean, that happens constantly. Are there any running themes that you find over and over again?
Well, the running theme is basically after their playing career ended, that they were not bitter at all by how things now work out in baseball. There was no blame or guilt that they wanted to assign upon themselves or really place. They were just thrilled with the idea that they had a baseball career, whether it be minor leagues or major leagues, and they loved baseball, and they still love baseball to a point. Not all of them still follow baseball closely, but they do look back fondly upon their baseball careers.
Is baseball still a big part of a lot of their lives, or have some of them just said, like, that was this chapter in my life, talking about a book and mention the chapters? Or do they want to stay in the game? Do a lot of them find success in other avenues of the game?
Well, there's a player in the book, Brian Milner. He's the only player ever to go right from high school. I'm sorry, the only positional player, non-pitcher, to go directly from high school in the major league draft to the major leagues. So he bypassed everything. Basically, days within his high school graduation, he is playing the major leagues. And for him, his career did not work out because of injuries, bad luck, all the things we're talking about. And he was out of baseball for a few years, totally. He was doing construction. He was doing whatever he could just to put money on the table. And pretty much by happenstance, he rekindled with somebody that kind of led him to the New York Yankees, where he was one of the traveling minor league coaches for a long time with the Yankees, where he basically helped train Jorge Posada to become a catcher from his infielder days with the Yankees. So he was basically the tutor and the mentor to Posada to get him ready to be a catcher. So that's one guy that wasn't really looking to get back into baseball and just kind of came back to him. But a player like David Clyde, who wanted nothing more than to get back into baseball and be involved in baseball in some way, knocked on the doors and tried to get in and was turned away. And no real reason provided why, just that nobody really wanted him around the game anymore. So those are the kinds of stories that are pretty interesting. Brian Taylor, the number one pick overall of the Yankees, he would love to get back in baseball, but it's not happening for him either. So it's very hit or miss about some of the players like KL Org of the Tigers. He is perfectly happy not doing anything with baseball. He works in the mortgage industry. And once he retired, he never looked back. He goes to like maybe 1 or 2 games per year because his daughter wants him to take her to a game. But that's pretty much it. So he doesn't look back at all. Although his uncle played in the big leagues, his dad played in big leagues. So it's a very big baseball family, but for him, it's not the case. He doesn't look back at baseball at all. So that's been the mix going on there.
It's interesting that you mentioned Brian Taylor, because I think when you see the title of your book, People of a Certain Age, that's the immediate thought is yes. Brian Taylor. We all had his baseball cards because we knew they were going to be our retirement plan, right? I think that it's unfortunate that he's having a hard time getting back into the game, because I think he's somebody who could really speak to minor leaguers, to speak to prospects and say, you might think you have this thing all figured out right now, but a lot of different things can happen. And let me be your cautionary tale, because, you know, as many times as we see, and I do think the draft is getting more and more honed in, where we're seeing less and less of these players who don't at least make it for a little bit in the bigs. But, you know, he can say, you might think you have your entire life planned out, but one bad move can mess this whole thing up for you.
Definitely. And with him, he was a record signing bonus at the time. I mean, it was New York Yankees, so they were going to sign him no matter what. And Scott Boras, though not officially his agent, more of his advisor, they did an excellent job holding the Yankees almost hostage to the last moment that they could to get the top price out of the Yankees. And he did really well his first season in the minor leagues, then went home when the Yankees wanted him to stay behind and do instructional ball. But kind of like what he said, he thought he didn't need to go do instructional ball, and he went home. And when he went home, his whole life changed. Circumstances that are still murky to this day. He had a horrible shoulder separation injury explosion is what it was called at the time, a shoulder explosion that could really be one of 20 different things. Many of them are rather terrible to think about. Some of the things that could have happened. Was it a bar fight? Was it over drugs? Was there a family? I mean, there are so many different versions of the story. I know Brian Taylor's kept the exact truth kind of hidden for a long time, but I do know that in the coming little bit here, he's going to talk about it. So we may know the exact truth for sure, but I think I have a pretty pinned down in the book about what may have happened.
See, that's how you do it. Throw out a little bit of a line there to keep people interested. I love it. I love it. So
good, thank you.
2 years ago, I interviewed Steve Stanley. He was on the Notre Dame College World Series baseball team in 2002. So I interviewed him for the 20-year anniversary of that team. He also happened to be mentioned in the book Moneyball, because that year he was the 2nd round pick of the Oakland A's. And he was playing his minor league baseball career. He was a big prospect. He was always on those lists. And then one day he just decided, I don't want to be on the buses anymore. I'm married. I want to have kids. I don't know if a major league career is for me. I went to a really good college and I got a degree,
Yep.
and I'm just going to go and start my own business. And he's successful and happy, and he looks back on it. And like you said, a lot of these players don't have that negative feeling that you might think. And they still love the game. They still
Mhm.
love to talk about it. But at some point, they were like, I can do maybe better with my life.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, like at some point when you're 5 years old, you pick up a little league bat or whatever. We're all told that we can't play baseball anymore, no matter who you are or whatever. Just these people have been graced to go a lot further than the ordinary person goes. They are the point zero, 24 zeros, 2-4. I mean, they are the tip of the tip of the tip. And, bless them for getting that far, but everybody's journey must end. And I think they all realize that.
You don't find a lot of animosity with these players, which is one thing that once it happens,
Yeah.
that they've come to peace with it. But do you find that they do chase the dream? Do you find a lot of them who chase it to independent ball and, really go far? Or if you were a big time prospect,
Yeah.
do you think there's more of a chance to just say it didn't work out and I think that's my sign?
In the book, there is not a player that once it was obvious that they couldn't get to their dreams, and I'm not talking about just being in the major leagues, I'm talking about being a really very good to great player. A lot of them knew that it was up. There wasn't really a player that hung around and went to Korea or played Mexican ball or anything like that. They saw the writing on the wall, so to speak. With Brian Milner in the book, there's a small part about that where it's kind of like he was at Major League spring training camp for, I think, the third or fourth year in a row. And the coach was like, one day you're going to go in the locker room and you're not going to see your name in the wall anymore. And what are you going to do? Kind of talk. And he wasn't even thinking that he was on the cusp of being released by the Blue Jays from the organization. And unfortunately, that spring, his name was on the wall and he was released. So that got him thinking before it happened, hey, what would I do? How would I do it? And at the time, he didn't really know. But once his time was done with baseball. He didn't try to play for another organization. He knew if he couldn't make it with his team, there's no use of trying to go elsewhere, that his time was done. David Clyde, was on several different teams. He finally ended up with the Astros in the minor leagues, and he probably could have made it up with the Astros back to the major leagues, but his road was done as well. Injuries took its toll, and it was just too hard on him, and he walked away. And that's kind of the common theme there is these players were, on everybody's wish list of best players coming up, and they were so highly coveted that when their time is done, they know it, and they're proud. They're proud people, even more so than the grinders out there. None of these players were real pure grinders. These were players that were just had so much talent that the average eye could see it a mile away. So if people like you or I could see it, imagine what these Hall of Fame executives see. So these were the best, and unfortunately, it couldn't work out.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting when you think about like that 14th round draft pick who fights in the minors for 6, 7, 8 years and finally gets that call up to the bigs. And that eventually probably would have happened to most of these players. They probably could have played a small role if they just stuck with it. But we think everybody's trying for the same outcome, but that's probably not the way it is. Like, if you're a first, second, third round draft pick, that they want you at the big league level. And if it doesn't look like you're going to be a star at that level, it might end up feeling like a disappointment. Whereas somebody who is maybe a reach, maybe they get drafted not as a favor, but as a let's see what happens, they might be more likely to stick it out to the point that they get that shot in the bigs.
Absolutely. I mean, like there's always a flip side of a player like Mike Piazza, who's what, 36th round pick and goes to the Hall of Fame. I mean, that's amazing. But a player like Ben Grieve, he's in the book. He was the American League Rookie of the Year with the Oakland A's. The next year after that, he was an American League All-Star. You know, I mean, so his career was progressing like crazy. I mean, he was, top first round pick, big bonus. His father was the general manager of the Texas Rangers. His father was also a first round pick. So he came from a baseball family. He even talks about taking batting practice off of Nolan Ryan when his dad was the Texas Rangers general manager. So this guy knew baseball in and out. He knew the hard work it took to be there. So he went from being Rookie of the Year to All-Star. And basically his career kind of went downhill after about 3 or 4 years in Oakland. And there were various injuries that caused that, just hard luck injuries and kind of like an incongruent attitude, maybe not from him, but fans and people around him knew how good he was and how good he could be. And it wasn't happening. So just kind of like you're so good, why aren't you better? And he still gets that a lot about his career. Like, you were so good, why weren't you better? And he gets annoyed. He actually gets annoyed by that because he's like, I was a really good player. Do you know how great these people are in the major leagues? I was a very good player for a long time. He was almost 10 years in the major leagues. He had seasons of 30 home runs and 100 RBIs. I mean, that's great. But for him, it was always like, and what? And what else could he do? What else did he do? And for him, that was a little unfair. And his father was also, his father wanted to make sure that people understood that his son was not a disappointment. His son was a good player. It's just, it was our attitudes and expectations of him that were unfair about him. And that was kind of a hard chapter to write because Ben Grieve knows that he could have, maybe if things went right with injuries and everything else, he could have been a better player, but he's perfectly happy with where he was with his career and proud of himself with his career. And when I look back at everything at the end of the chapter and at the end of the day, he's absolutely right. And his father is right. He had a very good career and he should be super proud of what he did. And he is.
It really makes you appreciate those players who do have the career that is 15, 20 years long. Like, that's not just talent. That's talent. That's determination. That's skill. That's stick-to-itiveness, but also, and this is a huge factor that doesn't get appreciated enough. It's a lot of luck because you can be one of the best players. I mean, you look at guys like Kerry Wood and Mark Pryor, who there was a moment where you would have said, these guys are going to pitch for 25 years. Like, they were built perfectly, and you thought, there's no way these guys are going to have those injuries, but it happens. It happens to everybody. And it is good to every once in a while point out the other guys get paid too, and they get paid for a reason. So it's not easy. It's not like you're just hitting off a tee. The other guy's trying to get you out as well, and they're very, very good at it as well. So all of those factors, I think, are an important part of your book. It not only shows what happens when you don't make it, but it makes you appreciate the players who do make it.
Absolutely. Baseball is a very fickle and fragile game. And as much as you want to say it's a team sport, there are people around you that are just trying to get in the lineup as well. And that can be around you or through you. And they'll do what it takes to get there. But it's still a team sport. And that's the hard thing about it. But like if Ben Grieve got hurt, somebody stepped right in and they were going to hold the job. Just like, Wally Pipp and Lou Gehrig. And the whole thing comes for a reason about Wally Pipp. So these players want to hang on the job as long as they can and hide their injuries like KL Org. I mean, he played injured for years. And each time he was like, hey, I'm really injured. I'm playing, but at the end of the year, let's get me fixed. We need to get my body fixed. And each time the Tigers wouldn't really do it. They wouldn't take the time out and the money and expense to get him healed because they didn't want him out for the next year. And his career really fell for it. I mean, he did not make it past, I think, AAA, but he was supposed to be called up. He was supposed to be the next really great shortstop. People look at his minor league numbers and they go, "Oh, he was a punching Judy hitter and whatever. He couldn't really hit." Well, he's playing on one shoulder, one leg, and whatever. I mean, it was amazing. Like when he was actually healthy for relative amount of times, he was more of like a Derek Jeter kind of hitter, where a lot of doubles, decent power. I mean, he probably could have been a 20 to 25 home run shortstop and probably 30 to 40 doubles and a Gold Glover. I mean, that's the kind of player that he would have been if the time was taken to just get him healthy from his shoulder injuries and leg injuries and whatever else he had going on. But sometimes the organizations have to take some responsibility in that as well. And KL didn't really go so far as like point a lot of fingers harshly, but you could see that it was definitely there for him, where there's some thought that he was not handled correctly by the minor league and the major league teams.
Was there one story that made you interested in putting together this book? Like, was there that one player that got you interested in this topic?
Brian Cole. We talked to him. He was, as I said, like one of the players like Albert Pujols and Heath Bell and all-stars saw him and went, "This guy is going to be the best ball player of all time. He has everything." And he was small. He was a grinder. He was only 5'8", 5'9", 160, 170 pounds, but he had immense power, immense speed. He was going to take over New York by storm. He was going to be the next big thing, to the point where when I talked to Jim Duquette, who was one of the general managers with the Mets, they basically traded away a lot of young outfield prospects. Terrence Long was there and Jason Tyner. These were players that could help any big league team big time. And they were ahead of Brian Cole in the years. So they basically traded them so that they can get Brian Cole set up to be the next big guy. And he would have preceded Jose Reyes and David Wright by about a year and a half, 2 years. But that nucleus would have been huge in New York City. In the book, people talk about him being like bigger than Jeter, like, big personality, big smile, that the marketers and the commercials would have loved him. And they talk about, the missed opportunity of Brian Cole. So that kind of got me thinking about it. I'm not a Mets fan by any means, but I just know, because I'm from New York, and I just know how it is. Like the young, smiling rookie comes up. Like I remember Ken Griffey, the kid, came up, and everybody loved that. The big smile and the hat on backwards. And Brian Cole would have been that kind of star power for the Mets. And the Mets really needed that kind of player. So that got me thinking about what if they had Brian Cole and he did well with the Mets? Could they have challenged the Yankees for the New York spotlight and the back pages? And would that have changed the whole complexion of Major League Baseball at that time? So that got me thinking about it. And then I did more research, and I always knew about David Clyde because he is like the typical cautionary tale. Of course, I always knew about Brian Taylor. And then Ben Grieve is one of my personal favorites growing up because the baseball card thing. I collected baseball cards. So I thought he was going to be the next big thing. But Ron Netchie, the player for the Pirates, who had 27 strikeouts in a minor league game with the Pirates. I mean, who strikes out 27 batters for a perfect game? I mean, it's never happened in any level in the minor leagues or major leagues. I mean, I don't care if you're playing against an 8th grade baseball team and you're 28 years old. You're probably not going to strike 27 batters out for a perfect game. Somebody's going to get a walk or something's going to happen. But no, not with Netchie. He did it. So that got me thinking, if this guy, it's 27 in a row, and you look at his combined season that year in the minor leagues, there was nothing like it ever on any level, the dominance that he did. And he did come up for the Pirates that year, and spotty, did well, but his shoulder was basically done. He tore the rotator cuff, and back then they didn't know how to fix it, but they didn't really know what was wrong back then either. They didn't have the CAT scans and everything he had now, so they just thought that his shoulder was just tired. So go throw more, you'll get over it, and that didn't happen. So that's one of the cases where if we had the modern medical eye of today back then, he could have been like Nolan Ryan. His fastball was 100 or so, and he had the curveball with Sandy Koufax. At one time, Baseball Digest said that his curveball was top 5 of all time, right behind Koufax. So, I mean, that's good enough for me. I mean, this kid could have been amazing. So,
Patrick Montgomery, you came up with a really good topic. And when you start with that, I think probably the book almost writes itself.
yeah,
Baseball's Great Expectations. Thank you so much for joining us. I think everybody should pick it up here and realize that we talk a lot about the Hall of Famers, but sometimes there's players who just don't make it there, and their stories can be just as interesting.
Is Derek Jeter in the Irish American Baseball Hall of Fame?
He is not yet, but we have traced his Irish roots, and
Okay.
he has been nominated in the past. He has not made it yet.
All right, because he needs to be in there, and it has to be unanimous. That way you can say, hey, he's unanimous for the Hall of Fame.
Thank you for joining us, Patrick.
All right, thank you. Bye.
With the holidays on the horizon, Patrick Montgomery's Baseball's Great Expectations might be a perfect gift for the baseball fan on your list. I'm Rick Becker, and this has been episode 103 of the Irish Baseball Podcast.